Really? But then why did it happen?
Because the state didn't implement and enforce appropriately.
But here's the fundamental difference, and I hope you and I hope everybody understands this. I see responsibility. I see people that are getting fired. I see changes. I see an admission that there was fundamental wrong that happened in the organization. But then when I turn to the EPA, has anybody been fired? That's a question.
No, sir.
Has anybody been dismissed?
No, sir.
When the EPA Region 5 administrator there, Susan Hedman, the day you finally did take decisive action, when you were questioned about that, you said that her act of stepping down was courageous.
I did.
I'm going to ask you again. Did the EPA do anything wrong?
The EPA worked very hard. Let me make one.
Okay, no.
Let me make one.
No, because
No.
I have another question for you. No, hold on.
Okay.
Do you think Mr. Edwards said anything that was inaccurate or wrong in those two testimonies?
I think he was not at all informed about what EPA did. I think he knows nothing about the law, which he readily admits.
He knows
He doesn't know how we're supposed to work in the system. He doesn't understand that the problem itself was the responsibility of the states. Oversight was our responsibility. We took that seriously, and we conducted it. Does that mean I don't have regrets? Because I'd really like to step
that's a
here
whole
back
different
here, sir.
standard. Everybody can say that's cheap. Oh yeah, we just got regrets. That's cheap. That's cheap.
Well, so you have to look at how the law works, and we did.
Yeah, you know what? And it failed. You failed. You said, quote, if there is anything I could do, if there was any switch I could pull, you had that under the law and you didn't do it.
No, sir, I did not have that under the law.
Yes, you did. If there is an imminent threat, there is an imminent threat, you can pull that switch. And you finally did in January. Administrator, you are wrong.
There's two parts to that, sir. You skipped the second.
What's the second part?
You need to have the information to determine an imminent substantial threat.
So why do we even need an EPA? If you can't do that, you were in those homes. No, I am asking the questions.
Okay.
Yes, okay. In February is when you first arrived on the scene, and it wasn't until January of the next year that you actually did something. That's the fundamental problem. Don't look around like you're mystified. That's what happened. Miguel Del Toro showed up in February. You didn't take action. You didn't. And you could have pulled that switch.
We consistently took action from that point forward.
There are a lot of people in this audience from Flint. Sir, nobody believes that you took action. You had those levers there. Mark Edwards from Virginia Tech, bless his heart. No, just listen for a second.
Okay.
Had the opportunity. They have said things like, we failed to get EPA to take lead and water risks seriously. It's possible, another quote of his, and this is possible because the EPA has effectively condoned cheating on the lead and copper rule monitoring since 2006. He read your op-ed that you put out that was one of the most offensive things I could possibly imagine. And he says about you, EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy, that effectively absolved EPA of any wrongdoing or any role in creating the Flint disaster. If you want to do the courageous thing, like you said Susan Hedman did, then you too should resign. Nobody's going to believe that you have the opportunity, you had the presence, you had the authority, you had the backing of the federal government, and you did not act when you had the chance, and if you're going to do the courageous thing, you too should step down. Do you believe there's any confusion about the lead and copper rule?
I do believe that it can be strengthened, and I do believe there are weaknesses.
No, that's not what you asked, strengthened. I'm asking if you think there's any confusion.
Well, I believe there probably is confusion. I'm not the one on the receiving end of it, but we work to clarify that whenever anyone has it.
You're the administrator. What do you mean you're not on the receiving end of it?
Well, I meant because we manage the program, the states do the implementation, and they do the enforcement. And in this case, we were very clear to them what their responsibility was under the existing law. So while I understand we should strengthen the law, I agree.
So
we had what we needed in place to prevent this from happening.
Okay. Well, on July 1st, she sends, and there are a lot of DEQ personnel on here, and I'm going to read part of what she says. You just said that you told them to introduce the corrosion control in April. Mm-hmm. This is what she wrote to the Department of Environmental Quality. The idea to ask Flint to simply add phosphate may be premature. There are many other issues and factors that must be taken into account which would require a comprehensive look at the water quality and the system before any treatment recommendations can and should be made.
Let me explain that, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
Because that actual advice came from Miguel. Because when I say you need to do treatment, it does not mean that I have a switch to turn on. He indicated that the agency didn't have the full water quality data. That's when we demanded and offered and begged to be on their technical advisory
You
committee.
were. This was a conference. It was a summary of the conference call between DEQ and the EPA.
No, there was a Flint technical
What do you mean,
advisory
no?
committee. I'm sorry.
Look, the public can look at this for themselves. Well, without
Okay, but it was not as easy as flipping a switch. It did not mean that they didn't need to require to do it. The question was whether we were going to be premature in how best to get that done.
No, what you did is you came here and you blamed solely the state. And I'm here to tell you, the state has a big part of this blame. I'm not trying to excuse them whatsoever. But you're trying to excuse everything from the EPA saying you told them to put phosphates in the water and they didn't.
Sir, I'm not trying
The
to
documents,
blame,
no,
trying to get
wait till I'm
facts
done
on
asking you the
record.
question. The documentation says that you actually had a conference call from the EPA telling DEQ to not do it yet.
No, we were telling them that they had to do corrosion control. The method and treatment depended on experts to tell them how to do it. We offered that consistently from March on, and they actually never even took us up on it till September.
That's not true. Well, I'm going to enter the record. We entered this before, November 3rd. Who is Peter Gravatt?
He is the manager of our drinking water office and headquarters.
Yeah, he's the Washington, D.C. expert. Here's what he wrote. Okay, this is November 3rd. It appears there are different possible interpretations of the lead and copper rule with respect to how the rule's optimal corrosion control treatment procedures apply to this situation, which may have led to some uncertainty with respect to the Flint water system. So here you have a city who's begging for help. They know they're in trouble. Okay, they're asking for that help. And I've got email after email from the Environmental Protection Agency saying, you know what, maybe you should hold off because we're not sure. Maybe there is confusion under the lead and copper rule. Maybe we are supposed to do 6 months of testing. I'm not excusing them at all, but you need to take some responsibility because you screwed up and you messed up 100,000 people's lives. 100,000 of them. 10,000 of those people are 6 years old and younger. And you take no responsibility. You don't think you did anything wrong. Right? You don't think there's anybody did anything wrong.
I already indicated that we could have worked more aggressively.
Yeah.
I wish we had. Can I explain the memo? Would you like me to?
I want you to have an appreciation and an understanding of why the DEQ people are confused by the direction from the Department of Environmental, from the EPA.
There was no confusing signal sent from the agency.
What were they
during
supposed
this
to
period
do?
Of time.
Should they have put the phosphates in the water, yes or no?
Not dumping it in without connecting with the experts, and they did not have the expert voice at the table because they refused to let us to the table.
They were at the table. It comes from the EPA.
Sir,
She
I'm
starts
sorry.
the email.
That is not the task force we're talking about to provide technical expertise.
Okay, let's go through the list. Leanne Smith, Richard Benzie, Chris Phillip, Carrie Monosmith, Dana, I'm going to mispronounce their last name.
It's okay.
Going through this, hold on.
I don't know those individuals, so.
Yeah, they all work for you. And the EPA, here's what it says. Here's what it says. I'm sorry, DEQ, but from the EPA, thank you, Governor. Governor knows who works for him. Here's it. Below are my draft notes from our call last week. Thank you all for participating. I apologize, first apology I had seen, for the delay in getting out this draft for you to all review. And it says, don't simply add the phosphates. All I want you to acknowledge is that there should be some.
It could have created more damage than it cured.
Exactly.
Water systems are difficult and deserve technical experts, which they did not have available. We did. They wouldn't let them at the table.
They were at the table. They were in the same conversation.
That is not the table. That is a semi-annual call we have with the department where we share information. If you look through the record, we consistently said we have national experts. We want to help. We had worked behind the scenes to figure out how we could do that. We just never got invited, nor were we accepted at the table at that point.
Yeah, I'm going to go through my last point, and then we'll get to Mr. Clay here. You said you didn't have the authority to do, I want to read to you part of the law here. Okay? This is section 1431, part D Part D, Section 1431 of the Emergency Powers within the Safe Drinking Water Act. It says, the administrator, that would be you,
Yes.
upon receipt of information that a contaminant which is present in or likely to enter a public water system, and I'm skipping ahead because it qualifies for terrorist attacks and all those types of things, which may present an imminent and substantial endangerment to the health of persons, and that appropriate state and local authorities have not acted to protect the health of such persons, may take such actions as he may deem necessary in order to protect the health of such persons. So if they weren't doing what you wanted them to do, why didn't you take action earlier?
I'm surprised, Mr. Chairman. The second part is about states' rights and what we have to do.
What do you mean the second part?
There is a two-part process to us actually issuing a 1431. The second is we need to make sure that the states aren't already taking appropriate action. That's what's so infuriating.
So when did you know that they didn't do it?
We knew July 21st that there was a systemic problem. The state agreed the next day, and then all they did was slow walk it. That's why we had to do it the way we did. I wished we had gone further. I wish we had gone farther. I wish we had yelled from the treetops. But there is no way that my agency created this problem, or there was ambiguity in the existing law that wouldn't have done the same thing that the governor said, which was let them know to use your common sense, don't put people at risk, just because we couldn't figure out that in the life of us, in our guidance, we never thought that anybody would go from a treated system to an untreated system and not treat it. I didn't think we ever had to say that, because I never thought anyone would. That's where we are today.
You can't have it both ways. You can't have people on the ground testing it, people like Miguel del Toro doing those types of tests, sending up the warning flags. No, sending up the warning flags and then not acting.
Okay,
I'm going well past my time. We'll recognize the gentleman from Missouri.
All right.
I see people that are getting fired. I see changes. I see an admission that there was fundamental wrong that happened in the organization. But then when I turn to the EPA, has anybody been fired? That's a question.
No, sir.
Has anybody been dismissed?
No, sir.
When the EPA Region 5 administrator there, Susan Hedman, the day you finally did take decisive action, when you were questioned about that, you said that her act of stepping down was courageous.
I did.
I'm going to ask you again. Did the EPA do anything wrong?
The EPA worked very hard. Let me make one
Okay, no,
Let me make one
no, because
No.
I have another question for you. No, hold on.
Okay.
Do you think Mr. Edwards said anything that was inaccurate or wrong in those two testimonies?
I think he was not at all informed about what EPA did. I think he knows nothing about the law, which he readily admits.
He knows
He doesn't know how we're supposed to work in the system. He doesn't understand that the problem itself was the responsibility of the states. Oversight was our responsibility. We took that seriously, and we conducted it. Does that mean I don't have regrets? Because I'd really like
No,
to
that's a
step
whole
back
different
here, sir.
standard. Everybody can say that's cheap. Oh yeah, we just got regrets. No, that's a cheap. That's cheap.
Well, so you have to look at how the law works, and we did.
Yeah, you know what? And it failed. You failed. You said, quote, really, but then why did it happen?
Because the state didn't implement and enforce appropriately.
But here's the fundamental difference, and I hope you and I hope everybody understands this. I see responsibility